college to City Hall. We need it now more than ever. We're all living in extreme weather times. The climate is changing. We've seen disaster after disaster. We need someone at City Hall that understands these issues, can communicate them to people, and will keep them at the forefront of every decision that we make, from new building codes to how we build our roads to disaster planning. Look what's happened in Hawaii last week. We need to be prepared for the next disaster that we know is going to come. I'm going to be your Houston City Council person at large, position 3. I'm counting on your vote so that we can make our city safer, more climate ready for the future for our kids. I have a 9-year-old. I'm up here in this area a lot. My mom, my aunt, my uncle, all live right up the street in Humble. So I'm going to be seeing more of you, and I'm excited to be here tonight. My margarita is waiting.
Hi, I'm Leah Wolfthal, running for Houston City Council at Large 1, because I believe in the Houston dream, that everyone from any background should be able to build a full life and thrive. Both sides of my family came to this country because of wars in Eastern Europe, so they raised me politics matters. If we get involved with politics and community work, maybe we can make things better. So my whole career has been dedicated to public service. Most recently, I was the executive director of the Center for Urban Transformation, addressing root causes of high crime and criminal justice involvement in the 5th Ward, connecting youth with trauma and mental health counseling, career exploration, basic needs services. I want to bring my skills in working with folks across the spectrum, across geography and ethnicity into politics, bring my training in mediation to address some of these issues: safety, budget deficit, aging infrastructure, so we can all thrive together. Leah Wolfthal at Large 1. Thank you so much.
Dr. Leah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Patricia Olivares. Some of you might know me because I was formerly a Houston City Council candidate for District E. Gotten that question so many times, like, hey, aren't you running? I'm like, no, not anymore. But anyways, it would have been so easy for me to go and crawl underneath the rock, right? But that's not what democracy is about. So I looked at who was out there and who I could support the best, and that was your next Houston City Councilwoman at Large 2, Holly Flynn Villaseca. Holly is an amazing person. She's an executive for the Fortune 100 company, focusing and specializing in infrastructure in the public sector, so she has the experience. She's also a former elected official. She was a Houston ISD school board trustee. She's also a mom, and that's really why she's in this race, is because she wants Houston to be the best version of itself it can be for her 2 children, who she plans to send to HISD. She plans on sending them to public school. Thank you so much, Holly Flynn Villaseca, for At Large 2.
I want to remind everyone this is a Democratic club, and we support Democratic candidates. Yes, this is a nonpartisan election, but we do have a person that is about to speak that is a Republican, a voting Republican. Keep that in mind.
Amen, democracy. I vote for the person, not for the ticket. Just saying, Senator John Whitmire is a great friend, and I support him and want him to be our next mayor. I'm running for Houston City Council at Large. Some of you may recognize me. I ran the Astros Foundation, built the brand in the community for the last 10 years, worked for Jim Crane for 25 prior. So I'm running because I want to see a change, as we all do. I've worked with city council members and the mayor over the past 10 years, and know that we all have to work together to keep our city great and our city moving forward. We need to work with the Harris County, our flood control, flood mitigation. I live in Kingwood. We experienced flooding, as many of you out here did. We need to work with the infrastructure, on the infrastructure. My priorities are first responders, law enforcement, flood mitigation, transportation, infrastructure. Houston is a driving city, not a walking city, not a bike riding city, not a horse riding city. We drive. So, Twyla Carter, Houston City Council at Large 3. Thank you.
Hello, Humble Area Democrats. I'm excited happening over the last 5 years. It's been incredible. So you need somebody who can come in there with experience. I've worked with the city of Houston for over 21 years, working in the mayor's office under Kathy Whitmire, Housing and Community Development, Solid Waste Management Department. I worked as a public information manager and the council liaison, and was activated during the storms to handle crisis communications. So I've worked under 5 different mayors. But not only have I worked under mayors, I worked on the greatest state representative ever, State Representative Symphonia Thompson, who is my mentor, my mom, as I've been out here in the last few years just getting groomed for this position. Let me tell you, this is a time like never before. You need to have somebody who's familiar with the city of Houston. I know exactly the background, and this is my time. Marina Angelica Corrier for Houston City Council at large position 2. Thank you so much.
All right, do we have any other 2023 candidates? Going once, going twice? All right. The floor is open to 2024 candidates. Come on up here. How are we doing today, Humble? Come on, Democrats, give me a lot more. How are we doing today, Humble? Hey, also my name is Karthik Sura, just like it's great to meet all of you. I'm an award-winning HISD teacher, renewable energy developer, and nonprofit leader who's running for Texas State Senate District 15. And I have a lot of qualifications, but I think the most important things that Democrats should care about are 1, stopping MAGA, and 2, special interests. We're not taking a single dime from corporate PACs, and I've been involved in the fight to fight MAGA, supporting Beto O'Rourke, Joe Biden, and a number of different other candidates. I think that we need to have Roe v. Wade, universal gun background checks, and Medicaid expansion on the ballot in Texas. We saw in Ohio what just happened in Kentucky and all these other states, but we don't have that right in Texas, and we need to put the power to the people and have referendums in the state constitution so we can take power back. My name is Karthik Sura, Sura for Senate. You can follow me at www.karthikfortexas.com, Karthik, and I would love to be your next state senator and be the first minority to ever represent this seat in the entire Texas Republic. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi, how you guys doing today? All right. First off, let me just say thank you guys for having me here. This is such an amazing group, so I'm glad to be in attendance. My name is Samantha Hutchison. I'll be running for Harris County Precinct 4 Constable, okay? So when you see my name on the ballot, it'll say Samantha Hutchison, okay? Because everybody refers to me as Hutch. Can I get everybody to say Hutch? All right, look for me on the ballot. Just a little bit about myself. I've been in law enforcement for a little over 10 years. The last 6 years of my career as a police officer, I served as a sergeant with the Harris County Constable's Office. I am aware of the change that is needed in the community. I am for the people, and it is definitely a need for change here, right here within our community of Precinct 4. So when you see my name on the ballot, I want everybody to say Hutch for Precinct 4 Constable. Thank you again.
Good evening, American Democrats. My name is Tim Horn. Most of you already know me. I ran 2 years ago for Humble ISD trustee position, and these Humble area Democrats helped and marched and block walked for me, and I want to thank you all. But now I am running for Texas State House Rep District 142. Those of you don't know, that is the seat that is currently held by Harold Burton. I need your vote. I need your support coming out next year. I want to make sure that our schools are not taken over. I want to make sure that our libraries are not turned into detention centers. I need to make sure that education is a focus. I've been in education for over 20 plus years, from Houston Community College to currently University of Texas, Indiana. So I need your support. I need your vote. I have a campaign launch event right here, same spot, with the group that helped me over there at Democrats next Wednesday from 5 to 7 p.m. right here in Los Cucos, the 23rd, and an event with a flyer on the back that you can use a QR code at the Houston Rockets on October the 10th. Please support me, Clint Horn, Texas State House Rep, District 142. Thank you. Hey, Clint.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Amanda Edwards, and I'm one of your former at-large Houston City Council members, and now running to be the next Congresswoman. Now, you may recall I was in something called a mayor's race not too long ago, but when Congresswoman Jackson Lee decided to come home and serve as our next mayor, I decided to make a pivot into the Congressional District 18 race. When I thought about that decision, I wondered, could we still fulfill our mission to make sure that everybody in our community, no matter where they're from, no matter what their background, would have the opportunity not just to be here, we want them to thrive here. And serving as the next Congresswoman for Congressional District 18 will enable me to do just that. It will enable me to bring home resources when it's coming down to the question of infrastructure for our community so that we're prepared for the next Harvey. It will enable me to make sure that we have a preparedness for access to health care, access to economic opportunity, and higher education. If you want strong leadership focused on people over politics, vote for me, Amanda Edwards, as your next Congresswoman. Thank you.
Good evening, folks. My name is Peter Fuller, and I'm running as well for Congressional District 1, Congressional District 2, so I'm looking at the universal reason up in Washington, D.C. Why? Well, similar points that some of my colleagues up here made, but instead of talking about infrastructure, which, the county could take care of that, well, I want to bring the money home for, say, the people, for you guys, a district, an office that cares about the people and making sure you have all the benefits that are due to you, having a police force that cares about you and we care about them. So how about 0 Point Energy? Tired of paying high electricity bills? We're going to vote for Peter Fuller, U.S. House, Congressional District 2, and you're going to learn more about 0 Point Energy as the time goes by here, and I'm a teacher about it, because I'm a teacher, certified teacher. Last thing I have to say is, if you guys are sick and tired of Dan Crenshaw, the voice of treason, Peter Fuller, the voice of treason, you're the vote. On March 5th, 2024. So guys, I'll see you then. Until then, I'll miss you Fuller out. And one last thing I'll leave you with, if you're sick and tired of the Republicans, if you want someone sweet, vote for Pete. Let's go. Thanks, guys.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bianca. I'm here in the place of Judge Julia Maldonado. For those of you that aren't familiar, she's currently our district judge in the 507th Family Court. She's been there since 2020. Before that, she had 18 years of trial lawyer experience, and she's asking for your support in March 2024. So vote for Judge Julia.
I'm Bob Schaefer. I'm the judge in the 152nd District Court, and I've been there for now completing my 4th term. I was part of the sweep in 2008, and I've been coming out to this group since 2008 to get signatures on my petitions. I want to thank everybody. I've met most of you today for signing my petitions. I come out to Democratic clubs because I know I don't have to explain to you that if you sign the petition, you can't participate in anyone else's party functions. So that means you can't go to a libertarian convention. We'll be on the ballot in March of 2024 and hopefully again in the general election. I appreciate coming out here and visiting with y'all. Good luck and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I did the sign as well.
I know I missed you.
Yes, sir.
I was going to catch you.
I do have another 23 or 24 candidates. Okay, Carthage mentioned something a minute ago about MAGA. You remember that?
Yes.
But we don't like that, right? But there is a MAGA we like, right? Moms Against Greg Abbott.
Aaron, you want to come up and talk to us? This is Aaron Wilson.
All right.
She's going to tell us a little bit, she's going to give us a high-level look at Moms Against Greg Abbott.
Thank you, John. Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Mulholland, and I'm a precinct chair in Montgomery County for precinct number 77. I'm the chair of the Mothers Against Greg Abbott chapter for the entire county of Montgomery County. I've also just recently been asked by the founder of Mothers Against Greg Abbott, Nancy Thompson, in case you know who she is, to step up to be the director for the region of Houston for Mothers Against Greg Abbott. So I am just getting started. I'm doing a little bit of organizing and we're recruiting members, but I just wanted to give kind of a high-level overview about what our strategy is and what we're going to be focusing on, during the remainder of 2023 moving into 2024. Aside from building community locally, we are going to be working step by step with the Democrat Party, with the county chairs to fill the open precinct chairs that are open, across the entire Houston area and statewide as well. And we're also looking for and recruiting candidates to run against Republicans, so that when we go to the ballots and we flip them over, there's no one on the other side of that page that is running unopposed. So that's something that we're doing statewide, and I just wanted to say hello and thank everybody for their support of Mothers Against Greg Abbott. It's been a wild ride, but help me boot Ted Cruz. So if you're interested in being a chapter leader, or in your area, or even just a member of a working chapter, because they are working. We are boots on the ground, canvassing and doing all kinds of work so that we can move the needle towards saying goodbye to Ted. And getting more Democrats elected. So really appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
All right, little housekeeping. Did everybody get one of the raffle tickets? Who didn't get a raffle ticket? Okay, make sure Bill can see your hand. He's going to give you a raffle ticket because we'll have a raffle at the end of the night. All right. So I know that you're not here to see me, you're here to see our guest speaker tonight. So let's just move on with the program. Okay. We all ready? Okay. All right. We'll do a little introduction here and we'll invite our guest up to speak. Veronica Davis is a civil engineer, a planner, a transportation nerd, a public speaker, a community activist, a guest lecturer, a poet, a moderator, a lover of art, a foodie, a world explorer, a wife, and a mom. When she was 22 years old, she wrote a life strategic plan, declaring that she would be a world-renowned transportation expert and an author with an eclectic collection of books across multiple genres. The clarity of that vision allows her to achieve her goals. She's determined, dynamic, and enduring. Please join me in welcoming our author, Veronica Davis.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I know y'all can do better than that. Good evening. All right, so while he gets my presentation out, so additional things about me. My day job is not listed because I would like to keep my job. So you can Google to figure that out on your own. But I am a proud member of the Democratic Party. I moved here in Washington, D.C., and I was a member of the executive committee for the D.C. D.C. Democratic State Committee. So very involved in D.C. politics.
And then just by nature of living in the District of Columbia, everyone that gets voted on and gets sent to DC, at some point, when you live in DC, you have to deal with them. And so we dealt with them accordingly. And so I will say too, 51st state DC. But moving on, so I'm here tonight to talk about my book. So this came about before my job here in Houston, and it really is about inclusive transportation. And it's my manifesto for repairing divided communities. Even as I came here today, I had to get across a multi-lane highway, risking my life, just to make left turns to get here. If you wanted to walk, I was at the Starbucks, which as the crow flies is probably not even a quarter of a mile, and you can't walk it safely. As you look at many of our cities across the country, we don't have adequate sidewalks. And Houston may be, and this region may be an area that drives, but that's also what's killing us. Right now, traffic-related deaths is the #1 killer of children. And so if we thought if this was anything else, we would put all of our efforts to stop it, but yet children are dying every day, and we accept it. Every year, we're at about 45,000 U.S. citizens are dying on our roadways. Texas has gone not even, 2 decades at this point without a death on one of our roadways. So I take it very seriously. It's a tough road, and a lot of it is created by my predecessors in the industry. So my book is out. It's on Island Press. At the end of my talk, so you got to listen to the whole thing. There is a discount code for you all. But next slide. So a little bit about me. So I'm not from Houston, but as they say, I got here as fast as I could. I am from New Jersey originally. Okay, Jersey in the house. So this is my town that I grew up in. It's a little itty bitty suburban town. As Jason Aldean says, try that in a small town. It's a small town, but it was also a really great place to grow up. It was very child friendly. I walked to school. We had no bus system, so you had to walk. We had walkable areas. This is the little downtown area. I grew up about 3 blocks north of here. But even kids as young as kindergarten walked to school. And we could because we weren't feared for our lives of, big vehicles driving fast, running us over. And it really was a great place to grow up. My mother and my father commuted into New York City by transit. And so, it formulates who I am as a person and what I know suburban areas can be. Next slide. A little bit more about me. So I'm one of the co-founders of Black Women Bike, located in the District of Columbia. And so even though I'm gone, the leadership is still carrying it on. And so what we did, I'm really proud of, we got a lot of Black women biking. When you look at health indicators, I heard a lot of the candidates talk about healthcare and all those things. Unfortunately, Black people are at the top of everything that's bad. Hypertension, diabetes, and all of those things. And so even with Black Women Bike, it was just getting women on bikes for whatever it is, whether it's health, fitness, happiness, transportation. And interestingly enough, I was in my 30s when I started it. I was one of the youngest members. We actually attracted a lot of young retirees who then went on to become licensed cycling instructors and got more retirees. And so even right now, as the organization is over 2,000 people, still strong in the District of Columbia, many of the women are in their late 50s, early 60s, even some in their 70s. And so biking has given them freedom. As they age, it is gentler on the body than walking sometimes. And they're using it as a form of transportation. When you're on fixed income, these gas prices, they keep fluctuating. They're going up, they're going down. But when you're on a fixed income, it gave them another avenue, another option. And it doesn't mean that they had to bike all the time, but it gave them different options and really became advocates for better bike infrastructure so people can feel safe biking around their communities. Next slide. This is me as a child. So I just love this picture. I think I was a cute kid. Thank you. So I couldn't touch my toes then, but I can now. I am a certified yoga instructor, and I think sometimes people think about yoga as the movement, but it really is an embodied life. I also identify as a Christian, and I am a believer in loving everyone. And so one of the things and one of the principles that really stuck with me through yoga was it's called ahimsa, which means non-harming. And so everything that I do, I try to take it from a lens of not harming people. And even as I write about my book, and I'll talk a little bit about what I call the silently suffering, I try to think about them every time I have to make decisions, sometimes hard decisions, but I think it is very important to make sure that we're not continuing to harm people who are constantly harmed over and over again. So next slide. So this is just to give you a teaser from my book, so you had to go buy it. And I just wanted to talk through it. So today I'm going to focus on 2 chapters, which I think will resonate with this particular group. But the foreword is by Tamika L. Butler. She goes by she and they, but a very, very, very good friend out of the LA area. And so she wrote my foreword and talked about, at the time that I wrote my book, I started before the pandemic. But the pandemic exposed a lot of things. I think a lot of us have changed our lifestyle as a result of the pandemic. As we all sat there for 8 minutes and 49 seconds watching a man take his last breath while calling for his mama. We talk about moms against Greg Abbott. Being a mom and someone calling for his mom, and I know that every mom out there had to feel a certain sense of pain. And so Tamika talks about that and why the time is now to have these conversations about inclusivity around transportation. In my preface, I talked a little bit about what it was like to just be an author and the process of pouring yourself into a book that then makes it open for critique, good, bad, and otherwise, and not knowing if you're good enough, not knowing if you qualify as the expert, and then you question, do I have enough credentials to be the voice of this particular topic? And I did, because I wrote the book. 2 is just the introduction. So it lays a lot of framework. So when we talk about how we got to where we are today, and I'll get into that a little bit, it just lays a framework for how our transportation system looks the way it does today. Chapter 1 is transportation is personal, so I'll give you a little teaser on that one in a second. Chapter 2, equity is more than a baseball graphic. Has anyone here seen the baseball graphic where it's equity, equality is everyone gets the same, and equity is everyone, and they're trying to look at a baseball game, and it's like a Kansas City Royals game, and it's like, first of all, who's trying to watch this game? Right? But, I think the challenge is when we say everyone gets what they need, and the reality is there isn't enough time, there isn't enough resources to give everyone what they need, and that's where we really need to uplift the communities that need it the most. And also, too, there shouldn't be millionaires, but that's a whole side point. For chapter 3 is should there be a war on cars? I am not anti-car. But I will say, someone talked about science earlier. We talked about science. So the science is the impacts of transportation are felt. It is the #1 contributor to our poor air quality. I talked about traffic-related deaths and fatalities. It is linked to the obesity epidemic and all the other health issues around it. So it's not to say that I'm against cars, but it is a conversation to be had. And as our vehicles get bigger, unfortunately, more people are going to die. There was a graphic that at 20 miles per hour, if you are struck, about 90% of people will survive. At 30 miles an hour, it drops instantly, that most people won't survive. But now with these bigger vehicles, we're even seeing, even at 20 miles an hour, that survival rate is starting to go down. And there's a lot of research out there. Dangerous by Design is one, if you really want to just get into the weeds. Dangerous by Design by the Coalition for Complete Streets, which is all data, it's all facts, no alternate facts, just the facts about where people are dying across the country. And this region is ranked, I think it was 16th, I believe, in the nation for pedestrian deaths. Number 4 is power, influence, and the complexity of people. So I'm going to give you a little bit more on that one. Chapter 5, bringing it all together, is really written for the engineering and planning industry. But I think as people who are interested in these things, that chapter might interest you. And then 6, we'll really get into that, and that's the task ahead. Next slide. So how do we design our system? I'm not making this up. Feel free to Google. So next slide. So this is a picture. It's what I call, what is this? It's the American dream. And so when you look at suburbanization and what happened, you had people who wanted the suburban dream of a house, a picket fence, a dog, a cat, and a vehicle. And so that was around the 1950s is when you first hear the term American dream. And at the same time, so we're in the Jim Crow era, you have redlining, which has been now proven. So there is redlining, and a really great book, if you are interested, called The Color of Law, that documents redlining in several cities across the United States. So you had redlining, you had protected covenants. And even the thing that's interesting to remember for people, even with protected covenants, it also included people who were Irish, Italian, and Jewish. And many of those protective covenants still exist today on deeds and the deed restrictions. And I know that even here in Texas, there has been a big effort to attempt to get those removed, but they still exist across the country. And so next slide. And with that, and the American dream was about a very particular type of person, one would call the WASP. And this is a Google. This is literally a screenshot of my computer. And when you look at American dream ads, this is what comes up. What do you notice? Okay, yeah, they're all white. Great. Next slide. Good job. Powers of observation. This is the one slide that doesn't have white people featured, and this is black people who are waiting in line for food. So next slide. And so when you think about our transportation system, that's how we got to where we are. So this is a map from 1960 of East Baton Rouge. Anyone here from Louisiana? No? Family from Louisiana?
Been there.
Been to Louisiana. We'll go with that. All right, so East Baton Rouge. And so what this is it's kind of hard to see, but it is a parcel map showing property ownership. And then it's kind of faded, because again, this is from 1960. You see this faded line. And so that's where they were planning Interstate 10 through East Baton Rouge. Next slide. Okay, and who lived in East Baton Rouge? Mostly black and Italian. So the arrow points to a property owned by my family. So my great-grandmother had a house in the front, and then my grandparents had a house in the back. And my mom lived in that house until she graduated high school. So next slide. So this is a picture of my great-grandmother's house that you see from the area. That's my uncle. I know, he's so handsome. So that's my uncle. And then next slide. This is what it looks like today. And so everything is gone. The back tree, that's where my, that back pillar right here, that was where my grandparents' house was. And so all of that now is I-10. And even for me as a child, I went to go visit my great-grandmother, so I was fortunate enough to know her, and visiting her house at 8 years old, and her house was actually under the highway. So my grandparents sold that house probably when I was around 8 or 9, and then she moved in with my grandparents. And so I say that to say, because I think sometimes we think about these highways, and it can feel like it was something very, very long ago, but my mother is very much in her right mind, and she remembers everything. And then there's family stories of like cows going off the highway, and I haven't been able to verify, but you know how families are. And so there's people, even if we think about this region, who remember what it was like before the highway came, and before it was expanded, and before houses were removed, and all those things. And this is the impact that we have. And I will give a lot of credit to the Biden administration and the members of Congress who voted for the bipartisan infrastructure law, not the ones that didn't.
Yeah.
For the ones that did, because there has been a huge focus on reconnecting communities. There has been a huge focus of at least making some attempts to get restoration, because there's scars in every city that you see across the country where neighborhoods were just completely demolished I experienced recently where there was a road, and in the middle of the road are still bodies from a cemetery that were never removed. And so it is still, we're still reaping the residuals of decisions that happened in the 1960s. So next slide. And so I will skip ahead to chapter 4. So in chapter 4, I talk about power, influence, and the complexity of people. And although I'm writing it from a standpoint of transportation, I think it is relevant to a lot of the conversation that I heard, a lot of the things that the candidates mentioned. So next slide. So this is a picture of really awesome people. I had an opportunity to go to Salzburg Global Seminar in Salzburg, Austria. And so in Salzburg, it is called the Meeting of the Minds, where they bring people from all over the country to just discuss a topic. And whatever the topic is, and whatever happens, or whatever comes out of it, happens. And so my particular seminar that I went to was talking about the built environment and the impact on public health. And so you had people like me who were engineers, you had planners, you had activists, you had community organizers, you had people from the medical field, both from practicing doctors as well as people on the public health side, and just bringing us all together. And so my group, one of the things that we talked about was power and privilege and how it plays out, and this ended up being the basis of my chapter 4. So next slide. So this is just how we defined it. There's a lot of definitions out there. But we define power as the ability to direct laws, policies, and investment that shape people's lives. And that can look a lot of different ways. And depending on where you are, your power might be a lot, your power might be a little. And there's always the power of the collective body of people when we come together to push for these laws and push the people in power to have better laws. And then we talked about privilege, which can look a lot of different things. Next slide. So in privilege, we just call it accumulation of special benefits. And so it can look different for different people, depending on what it is. You know, there is the privilege to be able to walk outside and having sight and be able to see and not having to worry about how you navigate your space. There's the privilege of not worrying if people, if you go to the bathroom and people are going to harass you because you may not fit what their view of that gender is. And so there's a lot of privilege around that, and so it's each of us recognizing the individual privileges that we have and how that plays out. So next slide. And so then lastly, this came out of the Salzburg Global Seminar. So lastly, we came up with this 3-part framework. So number 1, we moved away from this idea of safe spaces, right? Because the thing about safe spaces means I get to stay comfortable regardless of who I am. And we moved into a thing called brave spaces, and that was allowing people the opportunity to make a mistake. Maybe you accidentally misgender someone, but you are doing your best to understand and be better. It's the recognition that we're not going to be right, we're not going to always get the language right, but having the bravery to continue to show up, to continue to learn, and continue to every day push ourselves to be better and strive for a higher level of consciousness. 2, we said understanding the role that power and privilege play in different decisions. And then lastly was really analyzing and challenging all of those privileges. So in the next slide, and again, this is a teaser. This was my favorite chapter to write in chapter 4, just so you know. And so from a transportation perspective, I really broke the stakeholders down into 4 different types of people. So there's people in power, there's naysayers, there's champions, and there's the silently suffering. And so briefly, people in power can look like a lot of different things. There's the elected people we empower to represent us, and I know that you heard from many of those candidates there. But there's also the people that influence them. There's people who have influence, and I know that each of us has like the informal mayor of our neighborhood that has a lot of power that no one gave them, but yet they yield their power. And so it's understanding the power that you have and understanding who the people in power, what motivates them. How do you hold them accountable, especially for the people that you've elected to represent you? How are you holding them accountable once they are there and they're representing, hopefully, you? The naysayers. So back in the day, they used to call them NIMBYs, not in my backyard. And the NIMBYism movement actually grew out of kind of that environmental movement where people were trying to put very harmful things in communities. over time, that has shifted to other things. And so when you think about things like zoning, we talk about, I know housing affordability is very important to a lot of people. But zoning becomes the tool that people say, oh, no. I think there should be affordable housing, just put it over there, right? And so that is a type of naysayer of you are attempting to get to a goal where everyone can have a thriving life. And people are like, I agree, just not here. And it's playing out. I was just scrolling on Twitter in San Francisco. Somebody was carrying a casket down the street because they were getting ready to move parking spaces for a bike lane. And they were like, no, this is horrible. So it's the naysayers. And then there's a carefulness with the naysayers because there's some that it really doesn't matter what it is. They don't want any change. They are perfectly fine with the status quo. It doesn't matter who is left out, who is harmed. I am perfectly fine with how things are. And then there are people who, I'm not necessarily against it, but I have this concern. And so I do encourage my engineers to understand what is that true concern and to see how you can address it. And then your champions, that's you all in the room. Were you guys champions? Yeah. Yes. So the champions are the things who passionately want the change every day, wanting the change in the fight every day. And so very important allies. And also with champions, ability collectively to use your voice to influence who? People in power. So it's very important. And then even with champions, a very critical thing, and I brought this up at another book talk, is making sure you are a trusted advisor. And so always being able to come with an authenticity with everything that you're saying and you're reflecting. So making sure that you are a good champion. And then lastly is a group I call Silently Suffering. And so when we were doing our power and privilege analysis, there's this group that just always tends to get left out of the conversation. And that's because, especially for government, public meetings are held at night, during people's bedtimes. You have people who work shifts and they're at work. And so they're never able to participate. And what really brought to light all of this is during COVID. And so I know that there was a lot of fear out there. We didn't know what this thing was, and everything shut down, including transit. And so you had people, and everyone talked about the doctors and the nurses, right? And we said, oh, the essential employees. But no one talked about the cleaning staff, the janitors, security, the orderlies, and all of that, the people who support the doctors and nurses. They were left out of the conversation, and oftentimes they were left without a way to get to and from work. And that is what I mean by the silently suffering, and making sure that in everything we do, we're keeping them in mind, we're engaging them, and we may have to engage them differently. I shared an example of working on a public transit project where we literally, looked at the data to figure out when people were getting off the bus, never on, off the bus, and we set up a meeting in the bus stop. So you couldn't miss the meeting, it wasn't inconvenient. We set up surveys. When someone's getting off a bus, they're trying to go to work, you got about 2 minutes. That's it, you got 2 minutes. So it's getting to the pitch quickly. And then being very focused in the questions that we ask. If someone has 2 minutes, this isn't the time to say, tell me what you want to see. We don't have time for that. So getting to the point quickly. And so the data and the feedback that we got actually helped move forward. Otherwise would have been a hard project to advance. And so just in everything you do, always think about the people who are silently suffering. Next slide. And this is my favorite chapter. So let me tell you, so I didn't write the chapters in order. I wrote chapter 4 first. Again, it was my favorite chapter to write. I probably rewrote it multiple times. I wrote chapter 5 was an easy chapter. I wrote 1. 2 and 3 were hard because I was trying to figure out what goes in 2, what goes in 3. But chapter 6, let me tell you, Texas. Being here, I had scrapped my original chapter 6 and had to write a whole new chapter 6. So I'm from as I mentioned, I'm from the East Coast. I mostly have lived in blue states. And even growing up in New Jersey, we did have a Republican governor, Christy Todd Whitman. She was actually pretty reasonable, as a governor. EPA administrator, but she was a really, really reasonable governor.
outside of the whole, what do you call it, profiling, racial profiling of state troopers. That aside. But, you know, that problem exists in a lot of different states. But being here, and like, I was like, I feel like I'm in the belly of the beast. And it really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I'm giving you all this because, you know, it is very easy living on the outside to be like, oh, Florida go to Florida, Texas go to Florida too, and Texas go to Texas. Oh, that's just Texas. But the thing I've realized being here, now that I've seen the other side and I've been here, I see that this is really just the test bed. Florida and Texas are just the place where people come to test how far they push, and if it works, great, then we'll go do it elsewhere. And so I have been ringing the alarm to the people in the advocacy community of, we can't write off what's happening. Everyone needs, this is all hands on deck, if you will. And so chapter 6, I completely rewrote the whole thing. Next slide. And so I'm not going to go through everything, but chapter 6 was really the call to action. And so with that is, I put out a lot of different thoughts, and then put out some ideas for reflection. And so initially, so some of this is relevant to engineering. So moving quicker, as I mentioned, people are dying every day. And the problem is transportation is slow, just on how the funding is. We do long range plans, so we're looking 20 years out. You know, we come to engage you, and then we're like, thank you for your engagement, we'll be back in 10 years to build, right? Meanwhile, people are dying today. And again, real kudos to the Biden administration and the bipartisan infrastructure law, giving funding to local areas so that they can move quicker. But even that's not enough. And so I give a little tips for the transportation industry. Directing a vision, which again is more relevant to transportation. But the real key things, you know, the last 4. So enabling a bold vision. I know that many of the candidates came here to talk about their vision, but we really need to make sure that we are enabling them to enact that bold vision. Because what happens is, they say Mike Tyson says everyone has a plan till you get punched in the fight, right? And so it is not enough to just elect our people, but to continue to enable them to do their job, to do great things, and keep showing up for them even as they're in the fight. Increasing diversity. I know that there was one candidate that said that they would be the first person of color to ever hold their seat. I do think it is important to increase diversity, even as the attacks come and this idea of meritocracy. And the reality is the smartest person isn't always the best person. So there are some people who I know that are very book smart and don't ever need to lead anybody but themselves. Lastly is practicing, it's supposed to be empathy, pardon my typo. I have a child, I just blame everything on the child.
You were practicing empathy.
I was practicing empathy. But it really is about practicing empathy. And what I go in this is, it's making sure to put in the effort to decenter yourself. And it can look like a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be something performative. It could be something as simple as, I love reading, and so I am very intentional to seek out books where the main character, the protagonist, is someone completely unlike me. And I've read books where the protagonist was a transgender woman, and it was a sci-fi. I read books where, the protagonist maybe had a disability. And so what it does is, it's a fiction book, but in that author, particularly when they're writing from their representation, you get to see their thoughts, you get to hear their anxieties, so that you can just have a better understanding of people. And then lastly is understanding the opposition. I know that you all know your opposition very well, but really understanding the opposition and understanding what is motivating them. And I will say, just speaking as me and no one else, don't email my boss and get me fired. But I will say, we are really up against something in this nation. I think that in the Hamilton song, the nation's fighting for its very own soul. And that's how I feel right now, the just constant attacks on people.
And particularly as someone who, again, identifies as Christian, I just don't see how hating someone plays into Christianity. So just know your opposition, know what motivates them, and be prepared. And so lastly, so I had to add this slide in because I did an interview, and so someone was like, oh, so if we practice empathy, that means that we need to like take the time to understand like how white supremacy. I was like, no. And that's why I had to pull up this James Baldwin quote. Because like, I don't need to understand that. Because if we can't agree that I'm a human, there's nothing for us to agree on from there. So I just wanted to end with that. And so thank you so much for your time today. I do have some time for questions or comments. And so next slide. I'm sorry, I missed the best part. Sorry, y'all. Okay, no, keep going. One more. The discount code. So if you go to Island Press, and the discount code is inclusive for 20% off.
Good. Question from the back.
I was born and raised in Elizabeth, New Jersey, the city of champions. What was your city? I'm sorry.
My little town is Maplewood. You should know where it is. Yeah. I went to Columbia High School class of 1997. And for those of y'all that don't know, Columbia High School is known for Lauryn Hill. Does everyone know Lauryn Hill? Okay, Andrew and Elizabeth Shue. For the young people in the room, SZA. Also, my high school invented Ultimate Frisbee. Google it.
No, I was going to say, I really like this book because once upon a time when I lived in Austin, they were working on the public transportation system, and one of the things that it's always stuck with me is they took the bus stops and they took all the like overhangs off, and the benches were long, and they didn't want homeless people to sit on them for as long as they could. Dividers so nobody could lay down. Meanwhile, these were burning hot, and knowing the only people that take them are people going to work with no shade, I'm like, wow, how cool is that?
Yeah, so the comment was, for those of you in the back, she was talking about her time in Austin, and how they took out the shade structures and then added in dividers, so people who live in this, maybe poor, or maybe, lived on the street, wouldn't be able to sit there. And so that is something that it is very much a challenge. Interestingly enough, one of my projects that I worked on in Washington, D.C., we were working on a long-range transportation plan. And we were actually very intentional, and we did an outreach just to unhoused populations. Because I think that there is a stigma sometimes for people who choose to live on the street, have no other choice but to live on the street. And what we actually found, at least in the DC area when we were working on this project, was many of them were going to work. And so they were biking to get to work or using public transit to get to work. And so then we sat to try to figure out how we can make things easier to facilitate. And what we actually found, so in DC, similar to in the Houston, if you're ever using Metro here in Houston, you have a card that you can use. And so if you tap your card, you can typically ride the bus for free for about 2 hours. But what we learned in DC is that the unhoused population were still using the old tokens. And so that token was only good for one ride. So even things like using the bus was costing them more money, versus if we could work to get them the Smart Trip cards, they could then move for longer periods of time on one fare versus just the token.
Did you know that there was a study done actually that I recently did? They said if they take the money that they pay the cost and everything to stop people from getting in there, that they could literally pay everyone to have a free ride, and they don't even need to pay all the cops to come in there and do all that stuff?
Okay, so there was a study. I'll just repeat. I want to make sure everybody can hear. So there was a study that if the what?
So the money that they spend, the money that they spend on like your public public defenders and other types of things. The money that they spend on these public defenders actually costs more, I mean, the public, like our cops and things like that, actually costs more than if you just let everyone ride the transport for free. But they don't want to do that because they don't want poor people like riding it all day long. So that's the reason that they don't do it. And I just thought that was just really sad.
And would they ride it all day long?
Well,
They just don't wanna, they don't want them riding,
Right, so they
period.
pay more, and that happened because some cops had beat some people up, and it cost millions after that.
Oh, that happens a lot.
One trying to break in got like all messed up, so they paid millions and like damages. So.
All right, any other questions? Yes.
What was the name of that book that you said earlier?
The other book, so I reference Color of Law.
Yes.
It's a really good book, and it's very accessible. 'Cause, you know, I can't only do but so, like after reading all day, I'm like, yeah, I'm not really trying to read this. I also feel my book is very accessible, and a big thing about the structure of my book for you all that haven't had a chance to read it, it's I modeled it off of Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, where I introduce a concept, I walk you through my thought process, but then I also give you time for reflection. Because I wanted it to be, I didn't want it to be a book that you read it and you're like, great, read the book, and you put it up. I wanted it to be that book that you can pull back out. And even in the book I include, which is relevant to some of you all in here, is on the policy side, how do you really analyze a policy? What are you trying to fix? How do you know that you did a good thing once you fixed it? And then back to silently suffering, how does this impact them? Good, bad? Are you actually improving their lives, or are you making it worse? And I'll give a real quick example of that. You know, anyone here heard the term Vision Zero? Okay, we got people in the back. Okay, so Vision Zero came out of Sweden, and it's about zero traffic-related deaths and fatalities. But one of the problems, and it's about understanding that we're going to make mistakes. We're human, we're going to make mistakes, but we shouldn't die because of our mistakes. And so engineering is obviously a key component of it. Education is a key component of it. Enforcement is a component. And that's where you have a sticking point. And one of my good friends, and I reference him in the book, has a website called Arrested Mobility. And it's where we have these laws on our books under the guise of safety, but really what it does is put people in conflict with police, and it's used as a tool by law enforcement, not necessarily for safety, but if I can pull you over for doing this thing, then I can have a conversation. And so even if you remember Michael Brown, and so regardless of what you believe about what happened at the police car, all of that was initially triggered by jaywalking, and that came from the police themselves. And you think about jaywalking, why is that a law? Oh, because we want to keep people safe. It was a neighborhood street, right? It was a low volume neighborhood street. He was perfectly fine. And that's when laws, when you're not focused, can be used, that are used for safety, can be used in other ways. And so, I know there's a lot of things around helmet laws for people riding bicycles, and that has been shown in Florida to disproportionately impact Black and brown communities, although they are just as likely to not wear a helmet as other communities. And so I do include that in the book, is just that type of analysis to make sure that you're thinking about always who could be harmed if we do this thing, or who is harmed if we don't do the thing that's needed to be done. So thank you.
Someone with privilege and have a question too. So we're in Houston, and we all know that it takes an hour to get anywhere in Houston, right? And you got to be tall. But you know, the city's so big, and I read a thing about 15-minute cities. How would that apply with what you've done with your research, with your inclusive approach?
So 15-minute cities, it isn't that the whole city takes 15 minutes, but it's really about in every neighborhood, everything that you need is within, you can get to it within 15 minutes. Whether it's you bike, whether you walk, whether you use public transit. And so that's things like, and we're talking about needs, so that you can access food, you can access education, you can access, a grocery store, a doctor. All of these things are within 15 minutes. And so that is what a 15-minute city is. When you think about this region, we could get there but we make better decisions. I will say that if we continue to grow, expand, we will continue to have impacts on the environment. We're pushing people further out, and we're not thinking about affordability. And so I do know that a lot of cities are taking, it's hard because in this region zoning doesn't exist. But what a lot of other communities are doing is looking at how to have mixed-use communities so that people can actually have an affordable home and different types of homes. And I know that one of a popular thing, if you really want to nerd out in urban planning, you can always Google missing middle. And so that's the type of housing that is always quote unquote missing. So we have more than enough single family homes, we have apartments, but the missing middle are those houses, what they used to call starter homes back in the day, but that is what's missing, and those are typically in denser areas. So we could get there if we try.
I have another question.
Yes.
I'm just curious because I really haven't heard of 15-minute cities before, but now that you're talking about it, I mean, it makes sense. But like number one, I would be worried about how do they keep the housing affordable, and secondly, when they have cities planned, where do they plan to put the felony population, which is growing larger and larger every day? And like that, it's not just that there's no access to live anywhere. You can't rent even. Like, what do they do with that population?
So different cities have different things. So the question was, in 15-minute cities, how do you keep housing affordable? Number one. And number two, what do you do with...
In Texas, actually, we had 1 in every 3 people. When I went to college, 1 in every 3 people, because of laws that black and brown people are disproportionately incarcerated in felonies. So now there's a felony population, and now they don't qualify to even live in apartments. So where do those people go in 15-minute cities?
Right. So I'll say with 15-minute cities, so housing affordability. So part of it comes down to supply and demand. And so and it depends on each city is different and what that looks like. In some cases, what you see very popular in some of the densifying areas of this region are 3-2 townhomes, right? So they're nice and narrow. You still get a little bit of space. You get a little yard. You can at least turn around in the yard. You can take 2 steps, plant 1 flower. But that is what is helping. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but what's helped keeps keep it semi-affordable. So that's what they do. And then also what you see is the smaller homes. And even with apartments, having more bedrooms. That is a major issue in a lot of cities where most apartments tap out at 2 bedrooms, but really trying to get that 3rd bedroom in. And then some cities have been very intentional around senior housing, so that seniors who maybe have been living in a neighborhood have a place to transition once they're no longer able to upkeep their property. So there's that. In terms of the felon population, I actually don't know the answer to that. That's why I don't deal with housing. I deal with horizontal.
I was just asking because it's also an employment. Like they talk about shortage of employees, but like I said, if you actually look about a lot of the problems we're having on law enforcement, it's exactly what you said. Somebody who gets pulled over because
Right.
they were speeding and they use that same.
And I will say, there are a lot of second chance employers in this region. I will say the city of Houston is absolutely a second chance. Well, in housing, it's actually easier sometimes for them to purchase a house than it is for them to rent. The same way, in some places, it's easier for someone with a felony, a felony record to start a business than it is to get a job working for someone else.
Or to buy a house.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Veronica. All right, so now we're going to hear from Anna with our treasurers and membership report.
Hello, Democrats. Well, Okay, so currently, hold on, let me get back in here. And I just wrote it down. Hold on.